We have some people asking, like, what does the legal process look like exactly to bring an asset on chain legally? And is there a difference amongst asset classes? So maybe I'll go to Toufic here first. Just maybe could you explain like how it all works with the creating an entity and having different documents that you need to create and file. So just giving an overview to people.
Yeah, okay. So in reality, from a simple perspective, usually the way it works is that you have an asset, you put that asset in an entity, right? That entity, from a Canadian perspective, would usually be, a limited partnership. In the US, it can be an LLC. Um, the reason you do that is because corporations have usually in the respective corporations acts will have kind of specific you know um, evidentiary criteria for a share. So whereas for LLCs and LLPs, it's a bit more kind of fluid, let me put it that way. So you could kind of, state that an interest in an LLC is this token, right? So that's thing number one. So you got a bunch of assets in this, let's call it LLC for simplicity's sake. You're going to issue tokens. You're going to state that those tokens are represented um, by, represent interests in the LLC. And then you got to go through, basically, what Israel was stating, where you got to, basically figure out like, how's this offering going to be done, right? And under what construct are you going to do it under? The way I look at it from a US, from a Canadian standpoint, is there's kind of two ways, right? You can kind of go it quacks like a security way, right? And just run with that. And if that's the case, then you got to follow, any of the rules around that issuance, right? In Canada, we don't have a Reg A, right? So you got to, you really got, three options. You do a public market offering, which it's never been done before. You either do an exempt market offering, which is our Reg D, which is kind of this closed loop system, or you do a Reg CF, right? Which we also have. There is with certain folks, and this used to exist in Canada, doesn't exist anymore, but DigiShares could potentially do this in the US, is if there is platforms that have what are called, our ATSs, which are an automated trading system. If they have that registration requirement, what they can effectively do, it basically, it's kind of like a mini exchange, to put it that way. It's like an exchange, but without, it routes orders, but it doesn't have like the full scope of a stock market exchange. Um, Basically what you could do is that they'll do kind of what's called suitability, which basically means, hey, are you able to buy this asset? You come on the platform, right? And then you have kind of a kind of walled garden market in which you can sell certain assets under their ATS registration. There's other creative ways that we do with the offshore structures. With the offshore structures, really, it's just to kind of, very easily we break Howey in the offshore structures by creating a community managed fund in a jurisdiction that doesn't need any regulatory setup or requirements with respect to, securities law or investment management. Obviously, and it's really important, like securities law applies in the jurisdiction in which you're operating, more or less, and it also applies in the jurisdiction in which you're issuing, an asset to. So that's really important to remember, because some people say, oh, I'm going to set up an XYZ jurisdiction. I can do whatever I want. That is totally not the case, and it's way more complicated. You have to look at it, unfortunately, from a jurisdiction to jurisdiction perspective. But again, depending on your risk profile, you could say, well, the Brazilian regulator doesn't really care that much, and I only got a couple of guys there. I'm not going to worry too much about it, and so on and so forth. So that's kind of really, I would say, the step by step there. Usually you'll have some sort of documentation right? Usually you can have either, an LLC agreement, like an operating agreement, or, an LP agreement plus a subscription agreement, so to speak. And then you get all like the bells and whistle riders and disclosures that you have to do depending on, what type of offering you're doing.